me, Quinn, and welcome back to Mentally Together. Because whether you can see it on the surface or not, we are all trying to keep ourselves mentally together. And no matter what our brains are experiencing, we're not alone, we're together. We're only a few episodes into this podcast, and already I have learned so much from the different guests I've gotten to have on the show. Some of it is completely new information for me, new strategies to take care of my brain, etc. Some of it, though, is a reminder of things I have learned before, things maybe I've been told many, many times, and I've probably known for a long time, but maybe I forgot or just haven't made them a priority for myself. You know how that goes? Like meditating. I know that it helps my brain so much when I get up, do that first thing in the morning consistently, but I go in waves of doing that all the time, and then I go in waves of just kind of forgetting and falling out of the habit until something or someone reminds me. And that is honestly one of my big motivations for doing this podcast, so that we can all learn these things together and then keep getting the reminders of the things that we know can help us. For example, therapy. It is something that has come up on most of our episodes so far, which is no surprise because this is a podcast about mental health. So yeah, that seems pretty obvious, right? Yet, my track record when it comes to therapy is not great. Should I be admitting that to you as the host of a mental health podcast? No. Absolutely not, but also yes, very much so, 100%, because that is what we do here. We talk and admit the uncomfortable things. When I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression about 3 years ago, my doctor, before I left her office, gave me a referral for a counselor, and I had every intention of calling them pretty quickly when I got home and starting therapy. But for some reason, following through, actually making the appointment, doing all the things, felt like the biggest task ever to my brain, so I kind of just let that referral sit there. Then, a little while later, I decided to try the online therapy thing, because that seemed easier, but the texting and typing out my feelings thing actually just seemed like a lot of work to me. It kind of felt like managing my email inbox, which stresses me out. And again, the point of therapy, I don't think is to stress you out. But who would I know? Anyway, moral of that story, I accidentally ended up ghosting my online therapist. Whoops. Then finally, about a year ago, I decided this was my time. I was going to do it. I was going to go to therapy. I was going to make the phone calls, do all the appointment making things. And then the pandemic happened. You know the end of that story. Yeah, I didn't go to therapy. But I'm going to say this to you on the pod today, right now, because I have now made you my new mental health accountability buddy. Thank you for that. I am going to go to therapy. Okay? Inspired by this episode might be the thing to finally make me do it. Because today, we have an actual therapist on the show. She's also an author, a public speaker, and a wonderful human doing hard work to break down the stigma around mental illness. It's Ashley McGirt. Ashley is one of the leading therapists in the United States specializing in racial trauma. She's spoken about it at many events, including a Tedx Talk called Dying While Black, Links Between Mental Health, Chronic Stress, and Death. And recently, she started the Washington Therapy Fund, which provides free therapy to help eliminate the financial barriers to Black healing. It's so cool. She does so much. So we talked about what inspired her to become a therapist, racial trauma and the history of racism in the mental health field, and what exactly therapy entails. You know, for those of us who may or may not have been there before, I don't know, just asking for a friend. So let's get into it with the amazing, inspirational Ashley McGirt. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you? I know that's kind of a loaded question, but like generally, how are you doing in the world today?
Right. How do you answer? How are you in the middle of a pandemic? I'm blessed. I'm good. So I'll say above anything else, I'm good.
Wow. That's a nice answer. So my whole point of doing this podcast is to just get us all to talk about our feelings, our mental health, just like put it out there. And was that one of the big inspirations for you to become a therapist and do what you do?
No, I did not want to do this. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be
Oh,
in court suing people. I thought I was
specifically suing people?
I thought I was Johnny Cochran when I was younger. It's funny, my sister, she recently found this box of like old things that I had, and it said Ashley's Law Files. And I had like literal cases on everyone, like teachers, anyone who I felt had
My
wronged
God.
or harmed me in some type of way. So
This seems so opposite of what you do now, which like instead of suing people and like taking them down, you're literally trying to build people up and save their lives.
right, right.
And like make them feel better. So there's been a big when did the switch happen from
Complete 360, although I'm still very much into like law and justice, the criminal aspect. I have a law firm that I work with, and it's very rare that it happens. But when there are individuals who lose their case and they're getting ready to be incarcerated, they come and see me, and I help prepare them for what it's going to be like being incarcerated and turning themselves in. Because is a very difficult situation when you get to leave court, go home, and then prepare to serve your time. Because in these situations, the clients, they're sent home for whatever reason, and then they're told, okay, well, you got to check in to the prison, the jail, whatever the case may be on this date. So, it can cause a lot of anxiety, suicidal ideation, things of that nature. So I still work closely with the criminal justice system, and I do a lot of advocacy to help like end mass incarceration. I've worked in prisons and courts. So where did the shift happen? When I was like 19 years old, how old was I? My grandmother passed away, and I experienced a lot of grief. And I ended up going to the school counselor, and she didn't really understand the role of grandmother in Black families. And I found that most of my session was me educating her on what it was like being Black in America. And I grew up in a predominantly white environment. I was the darkest person in my school, one of the only Black people in my school. My brother, he's half white. So, he's light skinned, really curly hair. Oftentimes people didn't even know what he was. And then my older sister, she never was in school with me because of our age gap. Oh. So I felt really like isolated, being, one of the only Black people. And of course, the only one who looked Blacker, like being dark skinned, since everyone else was mixed, like my brother, or really fair skin. And my grief turned into major depression. And I really just wanted to understand what was going on. In my family, I come from a Christian background, so it was just pray about it. God will heal. Everything's going to be okay. And as much as I believe in prayer and faith, I was having a lot of difficulty, and I wasn't getting better. And I just felt there had to be other people who looked like me, who were feeling these things. I started reading a lot of psychology books, and also at the same time, studying law, thinking about what it's going to be like in preparation for different law schools and things of that nature. But my mind went more towards, why do people behave the way that they do? Why do people even commit crimes? Why am I feeling this way based on this loss? How can I feel better? And that's how I really got into this field, was ultimately losing my grandmother, grappling with my own grief turned depression, and then also being invested into the law and wanting to understand what makes individuals do the things that they do.
Wow. That really makes so much sense. I mean, when you first said like, I wanted to be a lawyer and sue people, and then now I help people, it seems like totally opposite sides of mental spaces to be in, but that makes a lot of sense how that could be connected. And I'm so sorry about your grandmother.
Thank you. Yeah, she's still a very much big part of my life. And the reason I do all that I do hospice therapy. So I help individuals who are at the end of their life, and I work with their family members as well. And it's really my experience in losing my grandmother and losing other people in my life that I can show up and do this work and still maintain my own sanity. Is not for everyone. It can be quite difficult and challenging, and I have to do my own practices so that I stay well, especially in this season of COVID and extreme grief and loss.
Yeah. I mean, You would think like on the surface, oh, if you are a licensed therapist, you have all the tools, you help people figure out their own tools and you lead them through it. But does that mean that you have all the tools for your own brain and that you're able to kind of prevent going into those big depression moments? Or you're just a human, right? Like
Exactly. At the end of the day, we're just human. And I have to remember, just like you, the tools that are necessary to help keep myself well, keep myself sane, centered and grounded. I'm a therapist. I have my own therapist who I go and see and I check in with regularly. I have a really good support system who I can talk to and understands the work that I do. So yeah, a lot of the things that I help my clients do, I model that in my own life. And sometimes I mess up, just like my clients will mess up. And I always say you have to extend yourself grace because we're human. And especially right now in the middle of a global pandemic, none of us have ever lived through anything like this before.
no, it's crazy. I was just before we hopped on this call, I saw some Instagram post that was like, just a reminder, we've been in this for almost a year. So if you're not like feeling great or productive or motivated or anything, like, why are you surprised about that? Like, literally,
Yeah, and for some reason, we have difficulty as human beings being still and having to constantly be productive. I've been telling my clients that it's okay to, take a rest, take a break. You don't have to do all of these things, especially in this season. And everyone always responds, well, isn't that me being lazy? And like, that's the first thing that comes to their mind, not that I'm protecting myself, not that I'm giving my body what it needs, but I'm being lazy because that's what society says rest is. It says we're lazy when the reality is our body needs to charge. We will not let our phone go without being charged. So we have to do the same thing to our bodies, but we don't take as much pride in it as we do our technology, our electronic devices.
Yeah. What are the biggest things that you've gotten out of therapy yourself that you have learned, some of the tools that you help other people learn and that have also helped you?
That I got out of therapy. I'll say one of the biggest things that has helped me. I don't think I got it out of therapy. It's just a practice I try to incorporate in my own life is really minimizing the content that I bring into my day to day. I use an external alarm clock so I don't wake up to my cell phone and have all of these unnecessary notifications and things. So I have like certain grounding practices. I have a device whose name I'm not going to say because they're going to start talking that wakes me up and will play encouraging music. So that's the first thing that I hear. I hear something encouraging and uplifting in the morning. Then like I'll go into a round of progressive muscle relaxation. Then I'll check my cell phone. And now I mess up. I'm human just like everybody else. I may fall asleep on my phone late at night and don't put it where it needs to be. So it's in the bed next to me. And I remember one time I did that on a Sunday. Sunday is like my day of peace. It typically, I'll try to go to church or do whatever I need to do. But on this particular Sunday, I fell asleep with my phone. The first thing I woke up to was Kobe Bryant's death.
Oh.
And I would have found out later, obviously, and still been sad. Yeah. But wasn't able to do my normal grounding practices. And I feel like I grieved Kobe Bryant's death more than I should have because my whole practice was taken off that day. Like I researched it. I was looking at the helicopter. I was really invested into it. Yeah. And I don't know him. I don't know his daughter, but it hit me in a certain way. And I know it was because that's just starting my day with that. That was the very first thing that I seen all over. And then I continued to seek out that information. I continued to find out the updates, what's going on, listening to all the stories, listening to individuals who knew Kobe Bryant. And finally I was like, yo, you are doing way too much. You need to chill out because I was just sad all the time during his death. And then like right after that, what happened? COVID.
Yep.
Had I have done my normal practices, I would have been more grounded. Like I said, I still would have been sad. It's a sad situation, to hear about anyone dying, especially with their young child. But I don't think I would have been so consumed with it had I have done my normal practices that day. And I just went through a downhill slope of Kobe Central and complete sadness, grieving someone I didn't know.
Yeah, I'm definitely very guilty of that, of like just getting up in the morning, looking at my phone. I've been looking on the web for some on the web. Who am I? I've been looking to order like an actual alarm clock so that I do what you do and not have my phone.
Yes.
But I've been trying now to like get up, not look at my phone for at least an hour, like meditate, do some stretching, like let my brain turn on before I start absorbing all this information. I don't do it every morning, but I'm trying.
Yeah, and that's all we can do is try. Give yourself grace. Like I said, we mess up, but it's okay. The more you do it and the more it's ingrained in you, it'll become an everyday habit.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you a couple minutes ago saying that as a therapist, it was hard for you to find a therapist to go to, because there are so many, even if you're not a therapist, there's so many hurdles for people trying to go to therapy. Me personally, like, don't even want to confess this to you, but I've never actually gone to therapy because, and like, I do this mental health podcast. I'm like, everyone go get therapy, like do this whole thing. I don't want to say, but I tried the online therapy, like chat thing for a little bit a year and a half ago. And then I accidentally ghosted my therapist because it just like wasn't working for me to do texting. Now it's all virtual. And I've gone through the process of like spend hours Googling it on the internet, find someone that I'm like, yeah, I like them. Then you call, you never hear back. There's all these just like stupid hurdles that my brain struggles with that, like, if I can't get an answer right then, I go, okay, it's fine, I'll do it later. And then 6 months later, I'm like, yeah, therapy. And then I start the same process again. But I know that that's not even the biggest hurdle. Like for a lot of people, it's the stigma around it or the financial component. What are some of the biggest hurdles you've noticed in people to actually coming and getting therapy, like just getting to that point?
You just named the two biggest ones, stigma and finances. And then once you get past the stigma, and then once you get past the finances, then it's accessibility. There's not enough clinicians to go around for everybody. I wish I could pull an Oprah, like, you get a therapist, you get a therapist, you get a therapist. But the reality is there's just not enough therapists trained and not enough with availability, or who specialize in whatever your needs are. So it can be quite difficult, which is why I really do a lot of talks with young people and encourage them to get into this field. And even if you're not young, it doesn't matter how old. You can be 50, 60 and still go back to school and do this work because it's necessary. Someone may want, an older adult or whatever the case may be as their clinician. There's one for everyone. I always say, like, I'm the millennial therapist. A lot of millennials come to me, but I also have clients who are well over 50 who come to see me, and I'm able to serve them and serve them well. So those are the major ones. And I'm really working toward ending the stigma around mental health, mental illness, because every single one of us on this earth has mental health. And then 1 in 4 of us has a mental illness. That number is probably higher now, given the state of the world. 50 million people unemployed, all of the things that's going on. So definitely I can see a lot of mental health stressors turning mental illness if we don't have the correct tools, which is why I really created my nonprofit to eliminate some of the financial barriers toward those in my community in the state of Washington so that they can receive free therapy. But yeah, cost, availability, access, not really having a good idea of what therapy is. The media, which is put out to entertain, we have to remember the media is there to entertain us. So there's plenty of movies and television shows that do not accurately portray what a therapist actually does. So plenty of my clients will come to me with this misconception of what they think is going to happen or how it's supposed to look. And I always ask my clients, what are they expecting from session? Have they been to therapy before? And if they've never been, what are they hoping to expect? How do you think it'll be? Are you laying back, feet up on the couch? Am I giving you advice?
That's what, when you said like movie and media portrayals, I'm picturing people on the couch and then the therapist just like, how does that make you feel? Like that's,
yes.
but I know that's not what it's like, but that I got the image that, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Or, hooking you up to a machine, a brain scan, like doing all of the things. So many horror films are centered around mental illness, psychiatric facilities. And I started my career working out in psychiatric facilities in Western State, one of the most historical psychiatric facilities in the United States. And that has a long history, which can be a very scary history too, for some of the things that took place there in that facility. A Stephen King movie actually was filmed there. Whoa. So at the very facility that I started my career at.
Yeah. Jeez. So what would you say if someone has never been to therapy? What is it like? What is an act? And obviously it depends on who you're going to see and what kind of therapy you're doing. But at least for your type of therapy, what does someone get when they come into your office?
Exactly. You hit that nail on the head. It depends on who you're seeing. And it's important to ask the therapist during your consultation. I always say you should have a consultation before you move forward. And almost every therapist offers a free consultation. If they don't, I'd be kind of leery why they're hopping in to treat you and they've never even spoken to you to find out what your needs are. But yeah, so therapy with me looks like work. And not everybody wants to work. And I tell my clients up front before they even sign that intake paperwork that it is work. I will assign you homework. There are things that you need to do outside of session. If you're not willing to work, I'm not the therapist for you. And there are some people who say, no, I don't want to work. And that is completely okay. Or they just want to come and have a conversation and talk. But that's not me. That's not the type of practice that I run, that I will ever run. So it's hard work. It's necessary work. But what I do is I gear my work toward you. What is your learning style? What is your personality? Are you audio, visual? If you don't like to read or write, I'm not going to say go home and do this journal assignment. I may say, hey, go watch this Netflix film. Brene Brown, she has a awesome thing on Netflix that I've had my clients watch, or listen to a podcast. Angela, we're on your podcast. Check out your podcast. But there's an episode on Angela Rise on one podcast that I've sent so many clients to. It's been powerful. Her and Gabrielle Union just talked about social media and comparison and what a lot of young people are experiencing because social media can be such a facade. So that's been an episode that I've had clients listen to. So there's different things. You have to get creative in your approach. And of course, I'm licensed in the state of Washington, so I'm upheld and bound by those laws. I utilize evidence-based practices. So I'm going to do your standard CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, a solution-focused therapy. So I'm always looking for the solution. Otherwise, it's really just a complaint. And sometimes you need that safe space to complain. And I'll ask my clients, are you looking for a solution or do you want to just complain?
Oh, does anyone ever just say, I just want to complain?
Oh, yeah. I have a client right now who just wants to complain and that's fine. And that's okay. And she's not looking for a solution. She just needs to get it out. And sometimes we need that safe space to do that. And this is really effed up. These are all the things. And I don't want to hear about how to fix it. I just want to tell you this is effed up and I don't like it and I'm not happy about it. And yeah.
Speaking of things that are effed up, one of the big things that you specialize in your therapy is racial trauma therapy.
Yes.
So what exactly does that entail? And obviously, so many of us, myself included, have lots of things to learn.
Yeah, so racial trauma is a fairly new concept, but it's a very old thing. Racism has been happening for centuries, but the concept of racial trauma was just recently recognized by the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, not too long ago.
Whoa.
And so essentially, racial trauma is a form of trauma. Most of us are familiar with PTSD. We think of veterans, things of that, where you have a reaction due to something that happened, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, 9/11, watching Twin Towers be crashed into. But with racial trauma, it's a form of race-based stress that really describes the physical and emotional reaction that individuals of color experience when it comes to constant exposure, re-exposure of race-based stressors. And now this can be either directly, something that happened to you directly, or indirectly. And what that leads to is a cumulative effects like hypervigilance, fear, shame, confusion, guilt, even physiological stressors or impacts on the body, things like, headaches, constant migraines, nosebleeds. This is something that I really see in our young people because they don't have the language to articulate what's going on. And so that stress builds up in their body, and then it literally releases itself through the body and the nose bleeding. This happens to adults too, as we store trauma in our body.
Yeah.
So all of this is being stored, and it's a form of like vicarious or secondary trauma, but it's constantly happening and to a deeper level. And if you're not familiar with vicarious or secondary trauma, that's basically trauma that happens that didn't directly happen to you. So racial trauma is George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Charlene Lyles, like I can go on and on. Racial trauma is a Black doctor being handcuffed outside of his home for delivering COVID-19 tests for the homeless. This is a real situation.
Oh my gosh.
Racial trauma is being asked to leave Walmart because you have a mask on. Mind you, we're in a global pandemic where there's a mask mandate to wear a mask, but you
should be told to leave if you do not have a mask on.
Facts. And this has been in the news where there was a Black man who was asked to leave Walmart, which he had a surgical mask on. He was asked to remove his mask in that store. So yeah, this is what racial trauma is. And in terms of like treating it, it's a lot more difficult than treating trauma, because trauma is typically something that happened one time. Like I mentioned, 9/11, that happened one time. There are things, physical abuse where someone may constantly be being physically beat or abused. But then when they get out of that situation, it stops and they're working through that trauma. Whereas with racial trauma, once we're done with the Zoom session, I press in, I could experience racial trauma. Mm-hmm. Or if we're having an in-person conversation or session, as soon as we leave outside those doors, I'm exposed to racism. And it's not pathological. So it's not something that we diagnose clients with. It's not a mental illness. It's a normal reaction to racism. And I always just compare this to grief. Grief is normal. It's something that we experience when we've experienced a loss. I'm not going to diagnose you with grief. But grief can turn into major depression. As I shared earlier, that's what led me to this field, because my grief turned into depression after the loss of my grandmother. So racial trauma has the ability to turn into generalized anxiety, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, all different types of things because of the cumulative effects that racism has.
And then even you mentioned nosebleeds, but I've also heard you talk about racial trauma or trauma in general just adding up and turning into like mental issues, turning into physical ones, and whether that leads to someone dying earlier than they should, absolutely, or any kind of illness or physical thing that can take over the body, which I think is something that at least we're getting to a point where we talk about mental health and we talk about our brains, but I don't hear a lot about how that actually manifests in the body. And that is so crazy.
Yeah, we don't really talk about the mind-body connection, and it's considered like it's somatic experiencing where there's something emotional going on where it shows up physically. And, we can't always see what's going on in the brain, but I can see a broken arm. So it's hard for us on the outside to really reconcile what's happening with individuals because we can't see it. But I'm more understanding that you broke your arm because I can see you're in a cast. And we have to really change that.
Yeah. Wow. Have Have you been putting off a visit to the doctor for way too long? Yeah, I do that too. And when I finally do call and make an appointment, the doctor's office usually tells me the next available appointment is months away. That's why I've started going to Zoom Care. With locations in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Colorado, Zoom Care offers same-day doctor visits that you can book online or from their app. Yep, you don't have to talk to anyone on the phone. They even offer mental health visits, where you can speak to a board-certified mental health provider in person or through video. Zoom Care is where I went last year for my ADHD diagnosis, and they made the process so simple. They really took away my stress. So if you're ready to make an appointment of your own, head to zoomcare.com. That's Zoomcare, ZOOMCARE.com. I love nut butter. Okay, that definitely sounds weird when I say it out loud in audio form, but you know you love it too, okay? Some toast with some nut butter on it in the morning. So let me introduce you to my favorite nut butter makers, Ground Up. They make super unique flavors like cinnamon snickerdoodle, coconut cardamom, and Oregon hazelnut. I can honestly never pick a favorite, but that is not the only thing that makes them unique. Ground Up's tagline is "Spread Good," because the company also provides job opportunities to women overcoming adversity, like incarceration, homelessness, and mental illness. You can support their mission by buying some delicious nut butter for yourself at grounduppdx.com. And use the code MENTALLYTOGETHER, all one word, for 15% off your order. That's code MENTALLYTOGETHER, all one word, at grounduppdx.com.
Now, back to the show.
So you're working to break down the stigma about mental illness, and the stigma exists for everyone, but would you say, is the stigma a lot higher for the Black community?
Yeah, it's definitely exacerbated for the Black community and other communities of color. One, because of the long oppressive history when it comes to psychology and therapy on Black people. They perfected lobotomies on Native Americans, on Black people.
Jeez.
There was so many different harmful experiments that were done at the expense of Black and brown bodies. So there's a stigma when it comes not only to the healthcare system, but especially the mental health system because of the harmful ramifications that it's had on families, especially when it comes to diagnoses. I'm going to give you this diagnosis and then you can't have your children in your home because of this. I'm going to take your children away, or you're not going to be able to have this particular job because of this illness that I gave you, or I'm going to label your child one way without understanding their culture or their diet, especially with the overdiagnosing of things like ADHD when it comes to Black boys. But what we're not looking at is that majority of Black and brown people live below the poverty line. So they cannot afford adequate nutrition. So they're eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on white bread, high fructose corn syrup, processed things, and then they're being sent to school. They can't sit still. But the reality is it goes back to what are they eating?
Yeah.
But of course, what can their families afford? But then the solution is going to be, I'm going to label you with this diagnosis, and then I'm going to medicate you, first looking at the systemic issues, the bigger issue around, health, nutrition, food, accessibility, parenting, all of these different things. So we see diagnosis differently. A white male can come to a psychiatric facility with the same exact symptoms as a Black man. The Black man is going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. The white male is going to be diagnosed with bipolar because bipolar disorder is considered something that's more treatable. Like schizophrenia has such a huge stigma associated with it. A lot of people fear people who have schizophrenia, but same exact symptoms, two different races. And the Black person is more likely to be diagnosed with that, and the white person is more likely to be diagnosed with bipolar.
Wow. That's so horrible. That's crazy. I mean, even obviously we're having this conversation during Black History Month, and I've seen from some of your posts a little bit of just what you said, that the whole system of the whole mental health system was built for white people. Like it wasn't made to work for people of color. Like, and like you said, used people of color to make the system, and then was like, oh no, we're it's for us though. We're just gonna be all these like white therapists and
that's why we have to know history. And I know it's Black History Month, but Black history is American history. And if you don't know your full history, you're not going to really understand these systems and the impact and why there's a stigma, why Black people don't want to go to the doctor, why Black people don't want to go to see a therapist because of this oppressive history. And the field of psychology was literally birthed from anthropology, which is racist as heck. Anthropologists were putting out studies trying to, show how white people were better in certain ways and aspects. William Wundt, one of the founders of psychology, Sigmund Freud, all of these different things that were put in a way to show that Black people were inferior and white people were superior to them in certain ways based on their work that we still have to learn. We're still taught this in psychology. We still have to utilize their practices. We're not talking about Dr. Joy DeGruy, who coined post-traumatic slave syndrome, or Dr. Beverly Tatum, who wrote Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together, and other conversations about race. We don't talk about Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who did the doll studies, which really shows how, as a society, we lean toward white people. It was a study where they showed a white doll, Black doll, and they would ask Black kids, Asians, Hispanics, white, who was prettier, who's smarter, all of these different things. And everyone pointed to the white doll.
Oh my gosh. I definitely remember hearing about this, but don't remember all of the details.
Yeah, it was done like in the 60s, 70s. I probably got that wrong, but then it was replicated in 2006. Same exact result. Same.
The same. Wow. That's
I even
really
did it
sad.
with my niece. And we live in a very affirming household, very diverse, but it's, you are beautiful. Like I said earlier, my brother is half white, but we really affirm that you're beautiful no matter who you are. If you're white, Black, you're beautiful. And even my niece had pointed to the white doll as being prettier, no matter what we do in the household, because in the society, when she goes out, these are the things that she sees. This is what her community looks like. Schools that are predominantly there's not a lot of diversity. Now, of course, with the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd protest, people are working to create more diverse things and really educate the community. But I thought that was profound. I did it with my niece. She's 13 now, so she was probably like five years old at the time when I had her do it, just to kind of see what her responses were. But yeah, so we don't talk about these things. And the work that I do with racial trauma, I had to do outside of my education system. I had to take other courses that I had to pay for on my own. I had to purchase other books, reach out to people doing this work and study under them, because it's not something that you're going to learn when you're getting a degree in psychology or mental health or therapy.
I mean, even talk about Black history, like just going to school as a kid in America, like you definitely hear about slavery and the civil rights movement. And then that's a few chapters of the book. And then the rest of the book is lots of white people and all the things they did.
Yeah. And now you can opt out. Apparently there was a school in Utah that just made national headlines because they gave individuals the opportunity to opt out of Black History Month, but we're not able to opt out of White History Month. And again, it's all American history at the end of the day, because Black people are American. There's, of course, Africans who migrated here from Africa, but for the most part, we have Black Americans here. We have Muslim Americans here. So when I was thinking about things like the Muslim ban, it's like they're actually Muslim Americans.
Yeah. Jeez. You mentioned post-traumatic slave syndrome, which was a term I had never heard until I think you mentioned it in your TED Talk, or you mentioned it. I don't know. I've watched a bunch of things that you.
Yeah, I probably mentioned it somewhere. Yeah.
Somewhere you mentioned it. What is post-traumatic slave syndrome?
So post-traumatic slave syndrome is a term that was coined by Dr. Joy DeGruy, and it really looks at the trauma that occurs following the legacy of slavery. So essentially, when slavery ended, there was never any collective healing. And so there were things in the community that we did as a people that served us well that are now completely harmful. And slavery's ended. We're free people, but those behaviors have been passed down generationally, and it causes a lot of harm in the community. So, for example, in slavery, they would auction off children. They would separate families. And one of the ways that Black mothers would try to keep their family together is by talking harshly about their children. He's no good. He's weak. He's terrible. You don't want him. So they would say all of this negative berating language, but it was a protective factor because they didn't want their child being sold off.
Right.
And here we are, free people, and this behavior has been negatively passed down in many Black families where Black mothers still to this day berate their children, but it's a protective factor that they're doing, unknowingly due in part to the post-traumatic slave syndrome in their family. And this isn't to say that white families or other families don't talk poorly about their children, but the way that it occurs within Black families has been directly due in part to slavery. Or just the fact that Black kids are not allowed to roam around freely. What does that do to the psyche? And that's due from slavery. You couldn't let your child walk off. They would be beat. They would be assumed they were running away. You just couldn't play freely like the white kids. And still, this is passed down when you go in grocery stores. The Black child is reprimanded by their parent. Don't touch that. Sit still, stay next to me. All of that. And then they see other children who are freely doing these things, and it has an impact on their psyche. And so these are some of the things that Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about in her book and just finds ways to heal from that. Since, of course, there was never any healing. We had Jim Crow, segregation. Now we've got the George Floyd protest, which now the community is coming together and reaching out to mental health clinicians and trying to do the healing. But it's been 100+ years of no healing. Yeah. I was watching a documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X, is so good on Netflix. And I had never really thought about it, but one of actually a couple people who were just telling Malcolm X's story, they had mentioned that the thing Malcolm X needed most was a therapist. He had literally lost his mind at the end of his life, before his death. The Nation of Islam had turned on him. Elijah Muhammad, he was broke. He had less than $200 on him. They were taking his home. So all of these things happen. We praise him now for his good works, but people did not like Malcolm when he was alive. Yeah. And he had literally lost everything. And the decisions that he made were very erratic. So I don't know. I can't say that he still wouldn't be assassinated, but how would his life be impacted if he actually had mental health services, especially given the work that he was doing and being on the front lines, which is really why I'm releasing my new ebook, which is a mental health guide for people who are doing anti-racist work, like Malcolm X, because it is stressful and you have to have an outlet to process those things, or it's going to take a psychological toll on your mind, your body, your spirit. So it's really my guide to help people doing the good, necessary work survive.
And that comes out on March 1st, right?
Yes, it comes out on March 1st. So you can pre-order it now on Amazon.
And it's called the Mental Health Survival Kit for Anti-Racist Advocates.
Now, it's a mouthful now that I think about it, but it's necessary.
No, it's great. Yeah. Is this your second book?
Well, my first book is an actual book, which is I Tried to Travel It. Not that this isn't an actual book. It's just an electronic book.
Yeah.
So you can't get it in a print format. But I have a paperback book, which is I Tried to Travel It Away, Mental Health Tips for Travelers. I haven't promoted that book in this season of COVID with orders. But, just protect yourself, do things safely. know your health, know your status, because if you have high comorbidities or things like that, of course you're at higher risk for COVID. So definitely protect yourself if you are going to travel. But yeah, so that's one of my books.
But I feel like also one of the points from that book was like, you don't have to, like, it's called I Tried to Travel It Away. Like, going and exploring the world isn't going to fix everything. So maybe this is the perfect time for people to read that book and think about it in that way, because we can't travel. So you got to figure it out in other ways.
Facts. You have to unpack your baggage, and it's all about learning to unpack your baggage, because traveling, you're just going to bring your baggage from place to place. And I've learned that firsthand. I've been to over 40 countries, and a lot of people, like, they were like, oh, that's really amazing. You travel a lot. And I kept trying to get my sister to travel with me, and she would never go. She went with me to Dubai. That's the only place she's ever been.
Oh.
But I couldn't understand why she didn't want to go. I'm like, who doesn't want to travel? And she's like, I'm happy being home. And when she said that, it hit me in a way that never resonated. I'm like, am I not happy being home? Why? Like, as soon as I go home, I'd be planning my next trip. And that was just me. Before people knew me as Therapy with Ash, I was Travels with Ash, just globe trotting the world. And I had to really sit back and do an assessment when she was like, Ashley, I'm happy being home. Like, stop asking me to go places. And that's okay. But you can get to a place where you can be happy being home and also enjoy traveling. And so the work that I share in my book is the work that I did in my own life, so that I could get to a place where I'm like, not trying to leave as soon as I get home. Like, I enjoy being home.
Yeah, you can enjoy both.
Exactly.
It's always nice
if you only want to enjoy one, like my sister, that's fine too.
Right, exactly. It is always nice when you get to the end of a vacation and you're excited to be home. It doesn't always happen, but that always feels nice when you're like, yes, I am ready to be back to my life because I like it.
Yes, exactly. And that's the goal. That's where I want people to be.
Sometimes I feel like we do think about our mental health in that way of like, I have to do something huge. I have to go on this big trip. I have to go change everything in my life. I have to do something crazy in order to fix it. But sometimes it's like little things. I've heard you tell stories about just somebody like smiling or complimenting, like just doing the littlest thing that actually can make somebody's day and change their whole mindset. Is that a lot of what you've learned?
Yes, I try to smile at everyone as much as possible. I don't always do it, but I try to, especially there's this documentary called The Bridge, which documents suicides on this bridge in San Francisco that people all around the world go to complete suicide. And this gentleman, Kevin Hines, he actually went to the bridge and attempted to commit suicide. And when he tells his story, he said before he chose to jump off the bridge, he told himself, if somebody smiles at me, if somebody says hello to me, I'm not going to do it. He caught the city bus. He walked all around. Not one person said hello to this man. Not one person smiled at him. And he jumped off the bridge. Of course, he survived to tell the story. He broke like multiple bones in his back. Really traumatic. But in hearing that, I was just like, wow, one person had the power to help change his mind. Because he's like, if somebody smiles, I'm not going to do it. And no one did. So he jumped. And of course, there were other reasons why he jumped and all of that. But it costs you nothing to smile. Right. It costs you nothing to be kind. And it's difficult now because we have masks on. So people can't see our face.
I've been thinking that I am such a serial like smiler just in general, I guess. But like, I still do it when I walk down the street in Portland. I smile at people right now and I have my mask on. I'm like, oh, they can't tell. Now I'm just like weirdly trying to make eye contact with them and making weird like squinty eyes because I'm trying to smile.
Smile with your eyes.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks.
There you go. We could just be practicing our smizing this whole time.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. That makes, how can we get better? So going to therapy is great. You get to have conversations with your therapist, hopefully work through some trauma, get to a better space. How about just the conversations we have with our family, our friends? How can we be more open and start having those conversations? Because sometimes even just that is really difficult to tell someone that you're struggling.
Yeah. So changing our language, we use a lot of stigmatizing language in every day. So, words like crazy or did you take your medication, just the way that we receive. So I think just starting with changing our language, listening, being a real active listener. Most of us don't listen, or we listen to respond. Or we're fixers. We want to fix the problem. We want to solve problems. And everybody doesn't need that. They just need you to really hear them out and listen. And if you are a fixer, you can ask the person, what do you need from me in this moment? That way they can tell you versus you start trying to solve all of their problems. And that's not what they wanted. They just wanted a listening ear. Also sharing, what's helping us, sharing that we've gone to therapy. I always say I'm a therapist and I've seen a therapist, I've gone to therapists, I've had really horrible experiences and I've had really amazing experiences. It's the horrible experience that led me to actually want to become a therapist. But essentially, when we share that, check into therapy, we check into the gym. Everybody wants to know you're at LA Fitness, Planet Fitness, wherever you go, but nobody wants to say on social media, hey, I'm at therapy today, or I learned this coping skill. I learned that this triggered me. But when we share those aha moments, other people hear, and then they want to learn some coping skills. They want to identify their triggers. They want to work through their childhood trauma or learn to reparent themselves. So opposed to saying things like, you should go to therapy, how about I went to therapy last week and I had this amazing weight lifted off of me. My therapist told me about this cool tool called progressive muscle relaxation. So see how that shifts the conversation versus you should go to therapy.
Ooh, I like that. If you're loving this episode of Mentally Together, you might be curious. What goes on behind the scenes? Which parts of the conversation were left on the cutting room floor? Well, let's talk about it. Over on Patreon, my patrons get to see deleted video clips from every episode and get to be the first to ask questions of each podcast guest. Like from this episode, you know that progressive muscle relaxation technique Ashley just talked about? I asked her to show me exactly how that works. So, if you want to learn that too, it's over on Patreon. Oh, and as one of my patrons, you get every episode of the show a day early, on Sundays. You can read all about the different tiers and sign up at patreon.com/Cassidy Quinn. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Cassidy Quinn. Now we have a few questions from our friends on the internet. The first one comes from our friends on Patreon, and the first one ties in perfectly to what you were just saying. Peter says, how difficult is it to not get emotionally invested and involved when helping someone who's experiencing mental trauma due to racial injustice issues specifically?
If you do your own work, it's not difficult. So as therapists, we are learned to identify transference and countertransference. So that is when we start seeing ourselves or family members in a client, or a client will can project and do the same thing onto us. So we're trained to identify that, and we're supposed to consult with other, clinicians, supervisors, things of that nature. But when you do your own therapy, you do your own work, it doesn't happen as much. It takes a very special, skilled person to actually do this work and hear these stories so that it doesn't take such a visceral response to you and on your body. For someone who's not a clinician, who's hearing these stories and wants to find ways for it to not impact them as much, I would do like some mindfulness-based work, some grounding exercises. You actually want it to impact you. I don't ever want to get to a point to where I'm desensitized to racism or trauma and it doesn't bother me, but so that you're not breaking down every single day, find ways to bring joy into your life. Because we can still be happy and angry and upset that Black bodies are being slain every day. Like I find lots of joy in my life, but I'm also upset. and angry as hell at what's happening in this country and what's been happening for a long time. But I don't fester in that anger. I don't allow it to consume myself. Otherwise, there will be no way for me to find joy, especially for the people who I love and who love me back. So yeah, just find ways to center joy and care for self.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And definitely spoken like someone who is a therapist and has been to therapy. That sounds like such a healthy way to do your work and to just be as a human. I mean, we all there are so many things, like you just said, to be mad about in the world, and especially if you are a person of color, seeing what's happening every freaking day for hundreds of years. But if you don't have the joy, like, then you'll just then what do you do? Yeah. Jenny says, I used to think that online therapy would not be useful, but now it seems like the only or main option. What are your thoughts on online versus in-person therapy?
Jenny, I feel you. I was with you. I was with you all the way. I was not a fan of online therapy. When COVID happened, I actually took a break from seeing clients. I didn't really know how long it was happening. And my experience with COVID was actually pretty funny, because I had heard the COVID was around and I was like, oh, I can take a vacation. I didn't really know what it was, but my hospice company was like, we're doing like a medical furlough. We don't want people working right now. So I thought I had more time on my hands. And I had first heard about it from the hospice company I worked from. I don't watch the news. That's one way I keep my sanity. I find out what's happening, obviously, one way or the other, but I don't directly watch the news. So yeah, that had happened. And I'm like, okay, so there's this virus going around, things are closing. All right, whatever. I'm going to take some time off and chill. So I had like messaged my clients, because I'm like, well, I don't want to do this virtual thing. And then it never ended. I'm like, okay, I just can't not work forever. So I have to find ways to make this virtual thing work. And I'm very hands-on. I like to look at a person's body language. If I can only see half your body, I can't see what's going down with your feet. What are you doing? How engaged are you? The body tells me so much about what's happening with someone emotionally, even when a client doesn't even recognize it. I will notice that a client leans in, or they lean back, or they cross their arms, or they're tightening up. There's so many different things that I'm trained to assess. And if I can only see it at half up, or some of my clients literally just have the camera on their face. So I'm limited. And also I have lots of hands-on activities. So I just said a whole bunch of negative things, but I ended up obviously adjusting. You have to adapt. This is the world that we're in. So I found ways to enjoy this online therapy thing. I totally miss seeing my clients in person. I don't know when I'll ever go back to in person right now, because I've adjusted so much to this virtual world. I should be wearing these, but Zoom fatigue is real, and blue light is also can take a toll on you, and you can get migraines and all of those things. So just take breaks, take it in strides, and it works. Trust me, as a therapist who didn't want to do online therapy, I now enjoy it.
I like that you say that you now enjoy it, because I have been thinking like, okay, when I tried the online therapy thing, it was before COVID. So no one had to figure it out and go like, this is the only way we can do it. Now we do it. I think it would probably work a lot better now. Sydney says, how common is it for people to make an appointment when they're feeling down and then cancel because they feel better? Does that happen? Do people do that?
I'm sure that they do. It depends, I'm trying to think of the scenario. If it's like a new person reaching out who wanted to start and then they're like, oh no, I'm feeling better. I don't ever really follow up and say, hey, why didn't you decide to come to me? That's just not me. If it's a current client, I've definitely had current clients who are feeling better, and we go through the termination process and we walk through it. Or sometimes it's just like, I'm good. I don't need this anymore. So that's definitely something that's happened in terms of really making appointments and canceling because of that. I have a strict cancellation policy. because I tend to stay really full. It's really difficult for individuals to book sessions with me. So that's not something that happens with me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have a client and just book and then cancel, or, there's fees and things associated with that. But yeah, definitely people do feel better. And the goal is not to be in therapy for life. So you should be discussing, what are your goals? What are you hoping to achieve? When will you know you've met them? How will you feel when you've met them? All of the different things, so then you can work on a plan and essentially exiting out of therapy or starting a new goal that you want to work toward. But essentially, termination is what happens in therapy.
Yeah, that's super interesting thinking about it. Like the goal is to not be there forever, to have goals and reach them. That's super interesting. Obviously, these are things I will learn when I go to therapy. Eventually, it will happen. This Zoom call is making me do it, I promise.
Yes, go to therapy.
Super quick round of questions.
Okay. All right.
Rapid fire.
Okay.
Okay, when is the last time you cried?
When was the last time I cried? Oh, this is terrible. I don't ever really watch reality shows, but somehow the TV was on and I was watching Real Housewives of Atlanta, and that Portia was protesting at the George Floyd protest, and then they just were highlighting all of the injustices and what happened with Breonna Taylor. And then Portia, one of the characters in the show, she met Breonna Taylor's mother, and just the way the camera embraced them hugging, and it was so emotional, and I was all tearful. And I watched that, 2 days ago.
Wow, when you started Real Housewives, I was like, where is this going to go that she's crying? Wow.
And it's funny because I don't watch reality TV.
You watched the right episode. What is the best thing you do for your mental health?
Rest, sleep.
What is your favorite thing about your brain?
That it's mine.
Ooh, yeah. When do you feel most yourself?
When I'm writing.
Ooh, that's a good one. What are you grateful for right now?
Life. So many people have died in this season of COVID. So to be able to be living, I'm grateful for life.
What is something you're really good at that people might not know?
Poetry. All right, poetry.
Ooh, I love that. That's maybe a poetry book in your future. And the last one, if you had to get, this is the weirdest one, if you had to get something tattooed on your forehead, like everyone's just doing it, it's a thing that's happening, it's like your message to the world that people will always see, you'll see it in the mirror, what would your forehead tattoo say?
Whoa, forehead tat. Cross between Black Lives Matter or it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah, you can do one on each cheek. We'll allow that. In the future of forehead tattoos. Those are good ones. Thank you. And then where can everybody find you to follow you all online?
Yes, you can find me on most social media platforms at Therapy with Ash.
And then the Washington Therapy Fund for people in Washington, where you are helping give free therapy to people, right?
Yes, WA Therapy Fund.
It's so cool. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me and teach us all so many things. I'm so excited for all the things you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you for all of your work, your podcast, branching out on your own. I love it. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much. And thank you, wonderful human listening right now, for listening to this episode of Mentally Together. We release new episodes every Monday, so I, Cassidy Quinn, will see you next week. In the meantime, go do something nice for your brain today. Do some progressive muscle relaxation, take a break, go to therapy. Okay, that last one was definitely for me, but just for you, do something that will make your day just a little bit better. Oh, and if you want to pre-order Ashley's new ebook that comes out on March 1st, her mental health survival kit for anti-racist advocates, or you want to donate to her Washington Therapy Fund, I've put the links to everything in the show notes. Because remember, we are all just trying to keep it mentally together. Mentally Together is produced, hosted, and edited by Cassidy Quinn in collaboration with Koba FM, a podcast network that is all about community, baby.